For more on the draft resolution on the Gaza conflict, we're joined from New York by SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, this is the second veto on the Council just this week by a permanent member. Paint a picture for us so soon after the G20 leaders meeting that called for reforms to the Security Council.
Let me just, Mfundo, read you a snippet from that leaders' declaration that emanated from the Leaders' Summit in Rio just this week. Quote, "We pledge to reform the Security Council through a transformative reform that aligns it with the realities and demands of the 21st century, makes it more representative, inclusive, efficient, effective, democratic and accountable, and more transparent to the whole of the UN membership." Cue this week, you saw the Russians deploy their veto on a ceasefire resolution for Sudan on Monday, and you saw the United States deploy its veto on a ceasefire resolution on the situation in Gaza, essentially blocking both the Russians and the United States, the broad consensus of the Security Council, one country blocking the other 14 members from adopting this text. This is the fifth veto cast by the United States in relation to the war in Gaza. And I think it speaks to the very real realities facing the member states of this organization in terms of the Security Council that just seems incapable, based on the vetoes that are deployed, to meet the moment, be that in Sudan or in Gaza today.
And I suppose is the real example that people would have needed to see why exactly we keep hearing of many countries calling for the reforms. Because if you've got the permanent five, or the P5 as some call them, being the ones who can with just that one decision, decide for the collective, it's honestly what China has said, something that history would judge the United States for in this instance.
It certainly doesn't make the Russians, vis-a-vis the decision on Sudan, or the United States at all comfortable, right? I mean, essentially, you saw them being castigated in the council. Let me just read you what some of the reaction has been. Human Rights Watch came up with a quick statement. Once again, the United States used its veto to ensure impunity for Israel as its forces continue to commit crimes against Palestinians in Gaza, including mass forced displacement and the use of starvation as a weapon of war. Oxfam says it's shameful that the United States has once again blocked consensus on a life-saving ceasefire. The Israeli ambassador, though, had a different perspective. He accused the 14 members that voted in favor of this resolution of failing to uphold justice, Mfundo. He accused arguing that the resolution was a roadmap to more terror. Quote, "The resolution being considered by the Security Council today is nothing short of a betrayal of the 101 innocent hostages that are still held by Hamas." The Palestinian envoy then also took the floor in the council and said that there is no right to mass killing of civilians. There is no right to starve an entire population. There is no right to displace people, no right to annexation. This is what Israel is doing, and this is what an absence of a ceasefire is allowing. A ceasefire doesn't resolve everything, but it is the first step to resolving. It doesn't resolve everything, but it is the first step to resolving anything. Let me just quote you a little bit more of what he said. "What the hell does Israel have to do more to have this council act?" So despite these vetoes being deployed, be that the Russians on Monday or the United States today, they certainly got pushback from the council. The broad consensus from the international community is that this war must stop, and that the Security Council, with its mandate to regulate peace and security around the world, is the foremost body. Not a negotiation being led by Qatar or the United States. The Security Council is the foremost body that needs to lead on this, given the failure we have seen by the US-led negotiations towards a ceasefire deal, which I might add was endorsed by the Security Council, the US proposal. The three-phase plan, right? We talked about that in June. It was endorsed by the Security Council in June, and it has still not delivered a ceasefire process in Gaza. So there is a frustration that is boiling over in fora like the UN Security Council today.
Sherwin, when listening a bit earlier to the United States, they seem to be at pains to explain why exactly they were not for this draft resolution, stating that there were a number of gaps insofar as the contents of the draft resolution is concerned. The missing phrase was that of just condemning Hamas. A bit earlier on, we also know that there was extensive lobbying or consultation to ensure that not only is there a call for an immediate ceasefire, but that also it be included in the same statement, the release of all the hostages. Just talk us through that.
Right, so it might create some confusion as to why exactly the United States vetoed this, where essentially they're arguing for the same things. They want the hostages released, they do want a ceasefire, but they want the ceasefire to be linked directly to, in the language of the text, to the release of hostages. They do not want two standalones. Essentially, what this draft resolution called for was an immediate permanent ceasefire, and separately, the immediate release of the hostages. What the United States is arguing, the one is not conditional on the other, and they want there to be a link. For a permanent ceasefire to take hold, there must first be a process that allows hostages to be released, which is basically the formula that is encapsulated in the ceasefire proposal that was endorsed by the Security Council in June. What this resolution did is, it set aside that proposal essentially to say we are demanding a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, but we are also in the same vein demanding the release of all hostages. The United States was seeking a link between the two. That is what the E10 was not willing to agree to.
All right. So meaning they wanted for there to be a condition to the cessation of hostilities, that if you want a ceasefire, it is conditional. You must speak of the release of the hostages. But just in closing, the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs releases a daily snapshot of the situation in Gaza. How are they describing the situation on the ground today?
Just to the previous point, Mfundo, essentially what the E10 then is arguing in response to the United States is that your process has failed. Let us just demand, let us not create conditions, let us demand unconditionally the ceasefire, unconditionally the release of hostages, and let us not create these interlinkages which the earlier process has failed to achieve in essence. The daily snapshot from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs basically says that they are warning that the people in the besieged areas of the northern governorates of Gaza have been struggling to stay alive, with virtually no assistance, humanitarian assistance, reaching them for some 40 days. Attempts by the UN to reach areas in the north, including Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and parts of Jabalia, which remain under siege, have been either denied or impeded by Israeli authorities. This month alone, they say, 27 out of 31 planned missions were rejected. Mass casualty incidents and Israeli bombardments continued amid desperate shortages of medical supplies, blood units, and fuel. Armed looting, fueled by the breakdown in public order and safety in Gaza, has become increasingly organized, endangering aid workers no less. Facilitating humanitarian aid as well as commercial goods both into and within Gaza is essential to address the challenges of looting. The solution lies in opening more entry points into Gaza. Israel, as the occupying power in Gaza, also bears primary responsibility for restoring public order. Essentially, there are two arguments right now. Israel is allowing some aid to get into Gaza, but because of the breakdown in public order, there is a lot of looting. There is no public law enforcement agency. Hamas, essentially, which ran Gaza before this war, is underground or largely decimated. So who is going to then process and coordinate the transfer of the humanitarian goods that sometimes do get into Gaza, but then you're dealing with lawlessness, armed looting, there is a breakdown of public order. So the E10 is arguing we've got to stop the war so that we can rectify those issues so that we can then get humanitarian aid to the population in Gaza at scale. These are all the complex issues we are trying to navigate here, and the ceasefire falling short, the ceasefire effort in the Council falling short yet again today.
A very worrying picture. Sherwin, thank you very much for that update.